Chanukah and Purim. These are known as two Jewish holidays. Yet as we will discuss, they are in fact not two holidays from God, and they are not written in the Torah. A more accurate way to refer to Chanukah and Purim would be as historical events in Jewish history. So let's discuss these events. The story of Hanukkah took place at about 150 BCE, before Common Era. It was the time of the Greek Empire, and the Jewish people were living in the land of Israel during the Second Temple, and the Greeks were heavily ruling over the Jewish people in the land of Israel. They enforced all sorts of decrees, and really they were trying to destroy the Jewish leadership of the land and create a Greek-dominated culture and society where the Greeks ruled over all aspects of Jewish life, and ultimately they ruled over Israel. Now, there was a group of Jews who were not happy with this, known as the Hashmonaim, the Hasmoneans. And so they fought against the Greek Empire. Now, mind you, the Greek Empire was very large and very powerful, and the Hasmoneans were a small group of Jewish fighters, but through a war that was considered to be a miraculous war, due to the odds being stacked against them, they went and they won over the Greeks, and they took back dominion of the land of Israel for good measure, and the Hasmonean dynasty was established, and there were a bunch of Jewish kings following that time period. And the Jewish people maintained more ownership and leadership in their land. And that was a very good thing. Now, this battle ended on the 25th day of the month of Kislev, and that is indeed the first day of Hanukkah. And during that time, the Jewish people rededicated their temple because it had been defiled by the Greeks. And the miracle of the lights, the menorah, was due to the fact that when they entered the temple, so the legend goes, all of the flasks of oil were impure. They had become defiled due to the Greeks. And so they only found one small jug of oil to last for one day. And they lit the menorah, the candelabra, the lights in the temple, and they realized that it would take 8 days for them to procure more olive oil. Now, why it took 8 days? Not exactly sure, but it was a time of war, so maybe it was hard to get olive oil. And it took 8 days, and they thought that they would only have enough oil to last one day. But miraculously, the oil burned for 8 days, as a sign that God still loved the Jewish people and wanted their light to shine on. And so now, traditionally, Jews celebrate 8 days of Hanukkah in the month of Kislev, where they light a new candle every day until by the 8th day they have 8 candles burning as a commemoration for this miraculous victory over the Greeks and the oil burning longer than expected. The story of Purim actually happened before the story of Hanukkah. It happened in about 500 BCE. This was during the Babylonian exile, between the destruction of the first temple and the rebuilding of the second temple. This was the time of the Persian Empire, and you had a group of Jews living in the Persian Empire, in Persia itself. And the king of Persia, named Ahasuerus, killed his wife because she refused to come see him at his party. And so he needed a new wife. Now, through God's plan, the wife that he chose was a woman named Esther. This story can be found written in the book of Esther in the Old Testament. Esther was a beautiful woman, and she was taken to be the wife of Ahasuerus. Now, at this time, Ahasuerus had a leading minister named Haman. And Haman was a wicked man who desired to destroy the Jewish people. And he cast a lot, and he decided that on the 14th day of the month of Adar, he would kill all of the Jewish people. And he would send out a notification to all the provinces of the king, because the Persian Empire ruled over all of the land. And he would say to everyone to kill the Jews. Now, this was a horrible thing that was going to happen. And when Esther found out about this, she came and told Mordecai, who was her uncle. Now, Mordecai was this Jewish hero of the story, and he told Esther, well, maybe it's for this very reason that you are the queen of Persia, so that you can save your own people. So Esther orchestrated a dinner between her husband, the king Ahasuerus, and the minister Haman. And at that dinner, Esther pointed to Haman as being the cause of her people's downfall and destruction. And Ahasuerus became infuriated, kind of realizing that Haman wanted to destroy his wife's people. And at that moment, he said that Haman would be condemned to death. And they looked over Haman's property, and they saw that he had built a great gallows to hang the Jew Mordecai, because Haman wanted to kill Mordecai. Instead, Haman was hung on the very gallows that he wanted to hang Mordecai on, him along with his 10 wicked sons. And instead of that day being a day of destruction for the Jewish people, it became a day of victory for the Jewish people, where they got to reclaim their freedom, and Mordecai became a glorified minister in the kingdom of Ahasuerus, and the queen herself was the wife of Ahasuerus, was a Jewess, Esther, and it was a very joyous time, this being the 14th of the month of Adar, as a commemoration for that miracle and the salvation that God brought for the Jewish people. Now, as historical events, these things are great to know that God gave victories to his people. Even during difficult times for the Jews, God was still on their side. It's a wonderful thing to know, and we should be aware of this history. Where things get sour and things go wrong is when the rabbis and the leading Jewish authorities begun to institute these holidays as actual holidays that Jews are obligated to follow. And so now, alongside God's holidays like Passover, Shavuot, Sukkot, you now have the rabbis' holidays of Purim and Hanukkah. And of course, this is problematic because God is the one who creates holidays, and God says not to add or subtract to his commandments. And so how do we now have men creating new obligatory holidays? In fact, if you were to study the blessing that is said when a Jew lights the Hanukkah candle or reads from the Megillah, from the book of Esther on Purim, what they say is, "Blessed are you, Lord God, creator of the universe, who commanded us to do this." Well, that's a lie. That's not true at all. God did not command us to light the Hanukkah candle. God did not command us to read the Megillah on Purim. So what it turns out is that you have man-made holidays that are now being stated as obligations and commandments from God. That is a huge problem, and that needs to stop. Just to give you a picture of the kind of law that was being enshrined by the authorities of Judaism during this time period, at the end of the book of Esther, in chapter 9, verse 31, to establish these days of the Purim in their times, as it was established upon them by Mordecai the Jew and Esther the queen, and as they all took upon their souls and upon their offspring the matters of the fast days and their outcries. So what's being said here is that in the same way that the rabbis instituted the fast days, because there are actually 5 fast days throughout the year that Orthodox Jews will practice. Now again, in the Torah, there's only one day of affliction, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. But when you look at Rabbinic Judaism, Talmudic Judaism, we're talking about 5 fast days throughout the year, which, again, we have no obligation to fast on these days. You're not obligated to observe these fast days in the same way that you're not obligated to observe these holidays. But the way that they're establishing this law is that the Jewish people have accepted it upon themselves and upon their offspring, which, by the way, no thank you. You can't accept things for your offspring unless we're talking about the Jews accepting the covenant from God, where God himself says, my covenant is eternal. My decrees are eternal. But only God has the ability to obligate fathers and children all the way down the generations. When it comes to men, they don't have this power. So this is actually overstepping boundaries. And this is really one of the only instances, if not the only instance in Tanakh, where an actual law is added to the original Torah, in which case it's not good. And it's really a problem that the Jews have taken the liberty to create these holidays and these fast days and essentially enshrine into the faith and into the practice of the religion practices and obligations and holidays and fast days that are not coming from God. This is not okay. You know, there have been many occurrences throughout Jewish history, many reasons to celebrate, many miraculous victories and great miracles that God has done for us, and also many, many sad days and many things to mourn over, and many horrible occurrences throughout our history that have brought us great death and destruction and sadness. So to say that only one day is worthy of celebration and only one day is worthy of mourning because the rabbis said so, or because this is how it was instituted in the religion, there's no way to really weigh these things out. And at the end of the day, it's all wrong. When we are beginning to add and subtract laws and commandments and holidays and all of these things to the original law of God, we are now deviating from the religion that God created, from the commandments that he gave us. And it's no surprise that these holidays and these fast days are called to be even more significant than God's holidays himself. Than the holidays that God gave us, they're going to say that their holidays are more important. There's a despicable quote from the mystics of Judaism, and it's brought down in the Zohar, the Arizal, and the Vilna Gaon, where they say that the Day of Atonement, which is written in the Torah, Yom Kippurim, is only like Purim. It's Kippurim, which means that Purim, a man-made holiday, is greater than God's holy day of atonement and forgiveness that is written in his Torah. Now, this statement is terrible on many, many levels. But let's just start from the beginning. God's holiday is less important than man's holiday? I mean, where does the hubris and the ego come from for people to even say something so terrible that God's holy holidays are only like our holidays? Not to mention that chronologically it makes no sense. Yom Kippurim was given in the 5 books of Moses, which occurred 1,000 years before the holiday of Purim. So what an absurd statement to say that something that came first was only like something that comes after. And God was foreshadowing that his Day of Atonement would only be like the day of Purim. But additionally, linguistically, this is asinine. It's actually so stupid because the truth of the matter is that Yom Kippur and Purim are 2 different words. The word Kippurim comes from the word kaper, which means atonement. The word Purim comes from the word pur, which means lottery, because Haman cast a lottery. So it turns out that not only is it a blasphemous thing to say in the face of God's holiday, it's also chronologically incorrect, but linguistically, it's actually completely idiotic. So it makes no sense and it's wrong, and it speaks right to this matter of a lack of respect for God's holidays and an elevation of man-made ideas in the claims that they are as great or even greater than God and what He has done. And this needs to stop. And if you want to commemorate these days in some way to remember these things that happen, I suppose it won't be held against you. But the truth is, all of the efforts that have been poured into the rabbinic holidays are for naught. They shouldn't be so significant in people's minds, and it would be much better if we focused our attention on God and His Word and His holidays, because that's where the true meaning is found. And that's where we can see miraculous victories and great salvation for the future, because it's not all about the past. It's about the future too. And God is with us in the present moment, and He's carrying us into the future. So let's be here with reality and not be caught up in man-made structures and institutions.